Picture this. It's your first day at Trump University. And as is customary at the beginning of every year, all the students are lined up, the first year students, to receive a polygraph test. The most advanced polygraph test the world has ever known. It can see all of your thoughts and feelings. It can tell if you're a good person or a bad person. It can tell who you're going to be politically, etc., etc. And they discover that, oh, well done, Timmy. It appears as though you have the psychological profile befitting or approximating somewhat to our most prolific mass murderers and fascists in history. Uh, Away with you to House Adolf, where we will spend the next 5 years training you in the art of the ultimate gun. That's Harry Potter. That's basically all you need to know. Sean did an hour and 40-minute video on it, which was very good. This is sort of an off-the-cuff addendum to that. Maybe precipitating a video essay of my own, we'll see. But he put his finger on a few things that could have been developed a little bit further, which I really liked. So that's a bit of what we're gonna do today. So let me pop up in chat so I can see you, and let us begin. How's the audio? Should have asked that before I started talking. That would have helped. Well, there are 3 beats we want to hit today. First is the education system. Second is the government, or the political form, or whatever you want to call it, of the Wizarding World in Harry Potter. And then finally we're going to talk about political virtues. What does Harry Potter imply makes the best politician? Or the best political actor, or the best citizen, or whatever you like. So, there are, to my memory, 23 different courses on offer at Hogwarts. Most of which involve the practical production either of potions or plant matter, divination of some kind, and these are not taken seriously. Generally, in the books, they are regarded by most characters coded as intelligent as being just actually a waste of time, except that they aren't for plot-specific reasons, which is rather strange. And then the remaining ones, charms, defense against the dark arts, transfiguration, etc., etc. These are all specifically trainings in the use of the wand to perform various tasks, mostly violent. Mostly involving overcoming human technologies like locks, walls, etc. Or just physically harming other people in some way. There are, as far as I'm aware, exactly 3 courses that have anything to do whatsoever with what we would typically associate with academics. Which is actually really important for the politics of Harry Potter, as we'll get into in a moment. And these are Muggle Studies, which is hilarious. It's the title. We know exactly what's being aped there. History of Magic, and astronomy. Astronomy doesn't matter. Astronomy is astronomy. Muggle Studies is... It's weird because it's a studies course, yet it's the only one of its kind. It sort of implies there's a field called studies, area studies, within the Harry Potter universe. But the only one on offer is Muggle Studies. And History of Magic is the really interesting one, because History of Magic is the only course wherein one might expect there to be anything akin to a liberal education on offer. Which is really telling, because This is the course that Rowling has all of the characters unanimously regard as just the most boring one on offer. Everybody hates it. The teacher is apparently a ghost who just was so dull that he didn't realize he had died, and so he just kept on teaching the course afterwards. And yet, um, it kind of betrays a complete failure to understand even her audience, because for people who actually really enjoyed the books, once you had access to the internet, what did you start looking up? You started looking up all of the stuff that happened, all of the weird things that happened, even the supplementary books. That there was a comic it's called Comic Relief. There were books released for charity that were based off of textbooks in the Harry Potter universe. There was Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which became the horrible movies recently. And I think, was the other one Quidditch Through the Ages? I think it was Quidditch Through the Ages. Yeah, exactly. She makes Harry Potter sleep through History of Magic. History of Magic is the only actually interesting course there, because the other ones are just uh, literally some kind of weird rudimentary agriculture class, except the plants scream. Um, Potions, where basically, as far as I can ascertain, its only function is to teach students, in addition to being able to use every single kind of firearm with the convenient with an object the convenient size of a pen. Um, Basically, how to exotically roofie your enemies, I suppose. What exactly was the point of potions? They seem to only teach people how to make stuff that harms people, or stuff that uh, makes you invulnerable to control. It's kind of like the reverse of X-Men Academy, where um, instead of training people they've discovered have immensely destructive power just within them, untamed, instead of teaching them to like control themselves and to sort of like integrate into society and et cetera, um, they're given like Snape enters the classroom. He's like, "I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory," that kind of thing. They're just taught, "No, we're gonna give you godlike power." To what end, we don't know. And until the third book, I think there actually is no indication that there are professions outside of Hogwarts. I think, if memory serves, and I could be wrong on this, it's been a hot minute since I've read them. Um, but it's literally just training to be a wizard for the first two books, maybe even for the first three books, but definitely for the first two books. Um, which is sort of fine, because then you sort of construe Hogwarts as a kind of like hidden technological cult, right? You can sort of understand how that would function. There's just kind of like, it's even in a castle. It's just they're these sort of cloistered hideaway communities that just foster these magical arts or whatever, and that's kind of fine. But then we learn in the later books that actually there is an entire governmental structure just overarching everything. In Sean's video, he made a very interesting remark, or not a remark, but he put his finger on something really interesting, and he was using this as a critique of of the notion that Harry Potter is somehow anti-authoritarian, which it's really categorically not. It's pro status quo, and it's anti not niceness, I guess, um, on the part of some actors towards some actors. Because again, at the end of the series, all is well, despite the fact that all of the inequalities and all of the bad stuff that characterizes the wizarding community is all still there. Just all that's happened is the bad man has been killed. It's like, great. But he puts his finger on something really interesting. Harry Potter, after his entire stint in Hogwarts, wants to become an Auror, which is effectively a policeman. Um, by the way, Harry Potter is a terrible main character. I don't think, and this didn't click for me, because you don't really pay attention to it, because he's almost treated as like a first person perspective in the Harry Potter books. Like it's written from the third person, but you have access to his thoughts, etc. Like it's basically a first person account by him talking about himself. Is sort of how I read it. There are bits that annoyed me, but generally it kind of slid by just how awful this character is. Um, this is a character who is sort of a foil for Rowling in that what he is interested in, what he cares about, sort of lays bare what kinds of things Rowling is interested in, what kinds of things Rowling cares about. And what was sort of brought up, not just by Sean, but by a few people, is that with the naming thing, Cho Chang infamously has two last names. Kingsley Shacklebolt is kind of obvious. Things like that. Like there's no interest whatsoever in looking into, well, let's say I don't know where Cho Chang is supposed to be from. I'm assuming China. Let's look into the naming conventions in different parts of China, and let's try to develop a history here. It's like, well, no, this is the Chinese one. Um, there's no curiosity about the world at all. None. What's interesting is stuff you can do with your hands, blowing up stuff, and just basically a working class, a proletarian power fantasy, for lack of a better word. But more to the point, Harry Potter is uninterested in the world he's in. He's described as being lazy. He doesn't. He's like imagine that you suddenly become aware that you can manipulate time, space, and matter with your mind. And not only that, but there's like a long secret history of people doing this, and like secret communities and secret stuff all over the place. Um, every fictional universe in the world, it's actually true in some respect. Like, would you ever stop being fascinated by that? Like, would you not be like tirelessly, because people will spend all night long till the wee hours of the night. Kids will read Harry Potter lore on the fandom wiki. Like, no, you wouldn't be lazy in that universe. You would be invigorated. Like, your real world would now be the escape, as it is in the Harry Potter books. But Harry Potter just doesn't care. This is boring. All he cares about is bad guy dead, yay. Food, booze. Like it's really pathetic. Um, the fact that Hermione isn't the main character is actually kind of astonishing. She's the only character that's, I mean, even in terms of background, she has an external sort of third person perspective on the Wizarding world, etc. Um, she actually demonstrates curiosity. She has intelligence. She has a sense of morality. She does things of her own initiative to like intervene in things. Like she's an interesting character. She's treated as Lisa Simpson, but she's actually an interesting character. Harry Potter's not. Harry Potter is only interesting because of extrinsic factors around his character that are forced in by the author to move the plot forward. He's basically a non-character, um, except insofar as he represents Rowling's complete lack of interest in the world or in people or in like the complexities of how people relate to each other in society, or in societies with deeply corrupt histories, things like that. But back to the point, Harry Potter wants to become an Auror. And it's like, well, of course the main character wants to become like a cop, because at the end of the day, Rowling is really just a neoliberal shill for the status quo. But it gets a bit more sinister than that, because as we've just been discussing, the relevant part of the educational system in this world, and by relevant I mean the part that interests you, that is made to be interesting to the reader, is literally just training in the art of the ultimate gun. Um, what else can Harry Potter do except become a policeman with that knowledge? He's literally only taught how to do violence with a boom boom stick. That's all there is. Um, how can any character in this world actually develop a really uh critical or imaginative view on things except by being just kind of like a quaint stereotype? Um, Mr. Weasley is basically just like the quirky suburban dad for some reason, despite the fact that none of these people live in really suburban settings because space has no meaning in this world. Um, we'll get into that in a second because that's interesting by itself. Um, the Weasleys are just generally just poor people. Uh, People are only defined by class and ethnicity. Whatever actually, like in terms of their actual histories, they're entirely determinative of where they were born, and what they look like. Um, no characters are the result of specific experiences, really, with the exception of Hermione, and that is a mystery to us. We don't know why Hermione, of all of the other characters, is the only one who takes an interest in the fact that suddenly the entire structure of her universe has been permanently altered. So the only thing you can become as a result of your education, because this is all that's really on offer, is an armed thug. That's all you can become. You can become the muscle for who? And this is where it gets really weird. Um, Given that the only class that teaches anything that could even incorporate any of the relevant subject matter relating to government or relating to administration or uh, something crazy like, you know, I don't know, constitutional theory or something like that. Oops. There's there's nothing else. So history of magic is the only example of a class that would possibly explain where people are getting the training to enter into this super complex bureaucratic government after they leave school. Which begs the question, why on earth is the wizarding world in Harry Potter controlled by a bureaucratic apparatus in the first place? Bureaucracies are essentially ruled by specialists in compartments. Um, the Ministry of Magic more or less operates as like the SCP Foundation. 90% of its functions appear to just be collecting dangerous things and containing them. That seems to be pretty much all it does, actually. That's all it does, and yet um, their primary outward-facing institution, which are the schools, because that's what collects people from outside of the wizarding world or inducts people who are manifesting magical abilities. Um, it takes them and then just wantonly supplies them with all of the material they need to become ungovernable. To become ungovernable, um, unsocialized. Because you recall in book 4, during the Triwizard tournament, there is a Yule Ball, and something that didn't stick out to me at the time at all, but it really does now, is that these characters from vastly different backgrounds, class, ethnicity, etc., um, are suddenly told, "Hey, there's this giant, awkward social event, unprecedented. None of you have been in any of these things thus far. These only happen as rare occasions every few years or so." Um, you are all now suddenly going to start dancing in a complex social situation with members of the opposite sex under extraordinary social pressure. Um, and you need to dress appropriately, yada yada yada. Where is the training for this? These people are pulled from the houses of people who basically exist in a different universe. At least a large portion of them are. Where is the training for any of the social niceties that are associated with everyday life? There's none. It's sort of treated as like as a gag, like it's a fish out of water moment. But that's a fish out of water moment that's relatable because of course we all have this, or most of us do anyways. These are really awkward things if you have no preparation for them. But why would they even think to do this? Um, why is there this weird film of social complexity hovering over the world of Harry Potter when the thing that should be giving rise to it, that should be directly produced by it, bears no relationship to it whatsoever, except in facilitating the production of armed defenders of that film, that sort of parasitic bureaucratic structure. So the school itself basically produces nothing but muscle for the government, and the government itself is supplied with technical specialists who apparently come from nowhere because there is no school for it. The only training that we see anybody get for government is by being an outstanding student and becoming a hall monitor or a prefect, as they're called. Um, Draco Malfoy is cast as sort of the primary uh, opposite to Harry Potter, is like his alter ego. Basically, this is everything that Harry Potter isn't as a character. He's the total opposite. He even has like the two friends following him around, so there's sort of a mirror thing going on. I think that's bullshit. Draco Malfoy is basically identical to Harry Potter in almost every single way, except born rich and bigoted. Same with Voldemort. Voldemort is essentially the same type of character as Harry Potter. If Harry Potter was basically a violent sex pervert or something, that's basically what the villains are. They embody all of the same virtues, the things that make them great characters within this world, the things that make them great, like terrible, yes, but great, as Ollivander says of Voldemort. It's like these are characters that are basically capable of dishing out humongous deals of violence, a great deal of violence with very little effort. The major characters in Harry Potter are defined by being killing machines. Dumbledore is characterized as sort of a, well, I mean, he's sort of framed as being like the Socrates or Merlin character, but really he's not. He's Achilles. Um, he's not the only one Voldemort fears because he's so clever and because uh, he's a genius and like he has great political power. No, he's the only one he fears because he has mastered the use of the magical gun. He is capable of firing better bullets than everybody else. The worth of every single character or their importance to the plot in Harry Potter is determined entirely by their capacity to do uh, a rocket propelled grenade's deal of damage efficiently out of the palm of their hand. all of the major players in Harry Potter are basically just gun-wielding lunatics. That's basically it. The actual foil to Harry Potter is not Draco and it's not Voldemort. It's Percy Weasley. Because Percy Weasley is actually the one who does the opposite of what Harry Potter does. Percy Weasley takes a specifically positive attitude towards the government. He acts as an enforcer of specifically bureaucratic rules, not an enforcer of the status quo, but of an enforcer of the bureaucracy's decisions. So he's an agent of the sovereignty of the bureaucracy. And he actually becomes inducted into an organization as a kind of apprentice, as opposed to just deciding, I will make my job be man with gun for the government, which is what Harry Potter does. The distinction between Harry Potter and because Harry Potter's still a government functionary, he's still a part of the bureaucracy. He's just its capacity. He wants to become its arm. He wants to become a part of the apparatus that allows it to dish out violence. The difference is that Harry Potter wants to become the man of action, and Percy Weasley wants to become one of the people at the desk who's getting in their way with rules and restrictions and things. Because that's literally all that they do, is they put restrictions on what the real people want to do, which is blow stuff up and poison people wantonly, and basically just power trip. Oh, somebody wants to join in, I believe. This is very unexpected. Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely, Leo, come on in. Come right on in. Let's make sure the audio is not crazy loud. Coming in, Leo, I called you. Okay, it's gonna be here there in 1 second. Looks like we have somebody with disagreements. How does the wizarding government even exist? Like, do people pay taxes? How work? Well, that's the interesting thing about it is a bureaucracy exists fundamentally to apportion resources. Hey, Leo, welcome. To apportion resources, to sort of deal with the logistics of like the economic management of the limited resources of a state, and to sort of manage its citizens and keep them in like a positive, productive relationship with one another. Things like that. Like they're administrative bodies through and through. It's the hyper rationalization of the state. But resources in space are limitless commodities in Harry Potter. You can have a savannah in your suitcase. There's literally nothing to apportion, and there's no explanation for why anybody can be poor in this world, because literally everyone has the resources of entire worlds at the flick of a wrist. Hey, Leo, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. I mostly agree with basically your broader points here that you're making about like the structure of the world, but in terms of what you're saying about like what they're taught in school at Hogwarts and like what is emphasized in terms of magical skill, I don't think it's actually just violence or even mostly violence. I think there's a lot of mention of like famous wizards who did like incredible things in their fields of discipline, like that one person who invented like a special potion. Was it that teacher who gave the potion of luck to Harry that also invented the potion? I'm not sure if it was, but either way, whoever invented that potion, I believe, was like regarded as famous. But there are other examples of this where there's like For example, there's also very famous, I think, herbologists or whatever. You know, the people dealing with like mandrakes and whatnot. Um, and
Yeah. So the
so yeah, I
function
think they
the
value
f-
those skills.
well, here's the thing though. The function of herbology is primarily to develop potions. The function of potions is to cure wounds and to supply people with superhuman powers. Um,
Yeah.
with respect to Felix Felicis, that literally does nothing for you except again supply you with an edge over other human beings in competition with you. That's
Oh
all
yeah,
it's
that's
actually
true
ever
for
used
sure.
for. Except that one time it's sort of feigned as like a confidence boost for Ron in Harry Potter 6. It's, I guess it only
Right.
appears in Harry Potter 6 because that's how Rowling do, I guess. She just introduces stuff and it disappears. Um, but like
Hello.
fundamentally, it's all they develop is to the end of giving individual agents inhuman levels of power over uh, weaker strangers in either combat or combat by other means.
Well, I don't know if that's the end of it. It seems like that's more like an accidental product of some of the things that they're taught, and rather the main focus is more like providing them with. It is providing them with power, but not necessarily power over other people. It's more like just general utility for all sorts of different tasks. Like, for example, the when Guardium Leviosa spell, it's not like an attack on somebody, but it could be used as an attack. But it
It's
would also be
actually,
useful in a
actually,
variety of
actually,
situations that
actually.
aren't.
Hang on.
Oh,
Its
oh,
first practical, use in Harry Potter is as a
is a
weapon.
weapon.
Is a
Yeah,
weapon. Yeah,
yeah, you're right.
yeah.
I know. I'm just saying that like the actual spell, you could see a bunch of utility for it that isn't martial, and it doesn't seem to have been invented for that purpose within the world. So I think like you're right that all this is ultimately producing power, and that is also because of the nature of the magic system in this world. Because um, magic system revolves around individual power, so it's just going to be the case that anybody who is trained in magic is going to develop more and more superhuman power, right?
What is the function of the Wingardium Leviosa spell besides as a weapon in the Harry Potter universe?
It's just to like levitate objects.
Sure. Okay, but then whether their massive slave population.
Why is there a massive slave population?
Why do they have
Is that what you
slaves?
asked?
Why do they have slaves?
Um, okay, so in that case, I think they're first of all, actually, I don't think it makes sense that they have slaves. But what I would say is that based off what I understand in the world, it seems like their slaves are for menial tasks that they don't seem to be able to or want to perform with magic. So like cooking, and like gathering resources, I presume. Um, like getting ingredients or something from like the forest, I guess. Like I don't know if that's actually something that happens, but it's just like an example of something I would figure. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the fact that they have this magic, I don't really see a reason why they would even. It would be a waste of time to have a slave class, basically, because they can just completely.
Well, not
Like it
necessarily
seems like they must
because
have some.
not necessarily because you
Okay.
don't want to necessarily have to spend all of your time personally Wingardium Leviosaing the cargo containers off the ships, right? But
Well, that I mean, that's an explanation in and of itself. Then that answers your question, right?
well, not exactly because there is no wizarding working class. Like the slave population and all this stuff and the fact that there is no meaning to space in this universe because people can just apparate from point A to point B at will. People can like
I
contain
don't think everyone
endless.
can operate, but a lot of people can.
No, basically everybody can apparate. Even house elves can apparate. You just need a license for it. It's just illegal to do it at a certain
Oh
point.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, that's fair.
yeah. So there's no actual people have no economic reliance on one another because literally everything can be attained by everyone with 5 years of training. Um,
Well, that I don't think that's true. I think that people have differences in magical ability, so some people would have to depend upon people who are better at magic.
yeah, but that in itself is kind of silly because the only explanation for some people being better at magic than others has nothing to do with natural ability. It has to do with natural cleverness and
I don't think
personality.
that's true. I'm pretty sure it does have to do with natural ability. Like that's a
Really.
part of like the whole pure blood, half blood thing. Or sorry, one second. I'll be right back. But go ahead speaking. I can hear you.
No, I think they're very particular about the fact that being half blood or pure blood has no bearing whatsoever on your actual magical ability, which is why Voldemort is a half blood and Hermione is a half blood, and both of them are the two most powerful characters in their respective milieu. Still there? No, he's gone. That means I win. No, but like seriously, the difference between one magic wielder and another one is just. I mean, the only thing I can think of is if there actually is like a natural disparity in terms of ability, like in terms of arm strength, say, as a point of comparison. It's just one person can Leviosa more, one person can killing curse more. Like there's no scale here.
Yeah, I think you might. I don't remember if it's actually like I don't remember if purebloods are said to actually be
No,
no
no, they're
better or
not.
worse than
That's the point.
the
Because if
Catholics.
she, if even for Rowling, if she took that line, then she'd actually be like avowing the ideology of the villains in her story. Like she'd be
That's
saying
true.
the
Yeah.
wizarding KKK is correct. That would be her stance.
Okay. Yeah. In that case,
Yeah.
that does make sense. That's yeah. You're right. That makes sense. There's no way she would put that in the book. Um. Okay. Well, I also suppose that cleverness in and of itself could be considered like a form of natural ability that not everybody's going to be able to attain.
Here's the problem. I talked about this sort of social film that's hovering over the wizarding world.
Yeah.
There is actually um, one location from which that could be sourced, except from education, and that's from household cults. So, in fact, ability would be directly tied to class in this case, because you would have people who are
Yeah.
conditioned from an early age to take an interest in their studies, to take an interest in certain kinds of studies, maybe studies that aren't offered at Hogwarts, which might explain why there is such a such a saturation in the Ministry of Magic of former KKK members, because they all happen to be from wealthy families that may basically teach each other how to administrate and how to do the job.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that makes sense. That seems to be the case as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Like Draco Malfoy, I'm pretty sure is implied to be relatively good at magic. I think, um, and his dad is at least. And there does seem to be like an air of superiority about their magic because of the fact that they come from the family that they do,
He's
and that
basically
also applies to other
he's basically
cases.
characterized as average. Like Harry Potter is characterized as average. This is like there,
Yeah.
despite the fact that he comes from a wealthy family, that inflects none of his characteristics whatsoever. He never demonstrates
I don't know
besides
if he
that
is. I don't know if he is. I don't know if
if
he
he
is
is what.
considered average. Like if I think about his examples of like for example his spell against the Dementors when he's protecting I think Sirius Black is that I think that's the right name at the lake. Um, his spell is really powerful, and then he comes back in time, do it again, and it's like even more powerful than originally. And I think it was also like that spell is also considered very complex, and it was like impressive that he was even able to learn it in the first place, let alone use it with that much power. And not to mention that he like um, used to be really good in wizarding fights, um, and like
Yeah,
his
yeah,
actual
okay.
magic
So
blast seems to be very powerful.
there is one dimension which there's a meaningful disparity between people with natural talent and people without, and that's again in their capacity to be hired muscle. So Harry Potter's talent is effectively to be a really he can manifest a better gun than other people can on average. That's his
Well,
that's
in
his
respect to
talent.
like cleverness,
Yeah.
it does seem to be that there's a very significant um, social reputation attached to like your ability to innovate in magic, and it seems
Sure.
like innovation is a major measure of how they see people being successful. Um, and that's what I was trying to get at with like. I think there's a lot of references to historical wizards that did impressive things that aren't just like martial related, but I honestly can't think of many examples.
I can think of
So I
one.
might be wrong about
I
that.
can think of exactly one, and it's actually the one that they bothered to mention on his chocolate frog card. Um, Dumbledore is famous for his defeat of the Dark Wizard Grindelwald. So,
Well, that's a martial example. I was thinking like invention and like scientific research kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure there have been wizards that were mentioned that were just like considered um, impressive because of the contributions they made to their field.
sure,
Magically.
but they have the relevance of someone like Steve Jobs, right? So it's like great.
Yeah.
This person occupied some role in the development of some invention, and that was it. Um, Beyond
Right.
that,
Well, I mean,
they don't have any actual function in society. They are a tree that bears fruit and dies.
Oh, I think generally speaking, their function and the function of a lot of wizards that don't just become martial is basically to do research, magic research. And if not that, then I think it's to
What are
produce
they?
like
What are they doing research
commercial
into?
products.
What are they doing research into? They've cured almost
Like for
everything.
example, herbology.
Yeah, so the production of ingredients for poisons and for healing ointments to back up the muscle.
Well, okay, for example, the luck serum, right? You're right
Yeah.
that that does give people power over others, but that's not the only possible application you could use for it. In fact, you could obviously think about it like if you gave everybody this luck potion, then everybody would be lucky against nature, and nobody would be lucky against each other. Make sense?
Uh, yes, but what does it mean to be lucky against nature?
Which I guess presumably just means like everybody just has good fortune with regard to like all external problems, except when it comes to outcompeting each other, or maybe it would just mean that we like the wizarding world just develops into
But
utopia
here,
because
here's
everyone's lucky and
okay.
nobody's
So,
competing against each other in a way that's bad.
so you're right, except that that bears no distinctive qualities from just the bare fact of being wizards in the first place. Obviously, by dint of being wizards, they have an advantage that non-wizards don't over the environment. There are two key advantages that the wizards seem to have over muggles. One is that their guns are better and more compact, and the other is that they are completely untethered from any of the material needs that non-magical people have for like limited space and limited resources. They can just conjure them, or they can conjure little pocket dimensions so that like space is no longer a scarce resource.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, they can still innovate even within that degree of power. So, like I said, the Lux serum, right? That would still be useful, presumably, even in a world where they have no material limitations with regard to space and storage and things like that, or food or something like that.
The thing though is that they're never actually taught methodologies for researching new uh, spells
Not
or
taught it. I
new.
agree with that, and that's just a problem of storytelling, though, not necessarily a problem of like the actual structure of the world,
No, but it sort of
or at
implies
least
that
it's not.
I don't think it's a
Yeah.
problem with storytelling though, because like crucially, we're talking about like the education system, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think what sort of comes out from this is that, and this is like people make declarative statements about certain spells being undeflectable, things like that. They just know to a certainty. There are spells that are undeflectable. There are poisons that are simply incurable. There are things that simply cannot be undone because magic is not treated. This is the grand irony of the thing. The magical system in Harry Potter, magic in Harry Potter, is basically just a super reductionistic and insulting caricature of our own technological engagement with the world. The fact
Right.
that the entire
Absolutely.
world is rendered legible in that way, where everything can be affected just by adherence to specific rules, is actually literally the disenchantment of the world that Weber talks about in Politics as a Vocation. Um,
That's interesting. It's an interesting comparison. You
the
want to elaborate on that more?
Sure. Well, the point that he's getting at is our conception of the world. When he's talking about the disenchantment of the world, he's not talking about the fact that we don't believe in God or something, or the fact that nothing's cool or interesting anymore. The point is, the world is disenchanted. There isn't a fog of mystery around it. We have this conception, rightly or wrongly, that the world as such is a kind of closed circle that has a limited number of terms to be understood, even if they're like beyond our capacity as a species to actually grasp. Um, we can conceive of it in advance of actually doing the task of exploring it all.
Right.
It's a complete
Almost like
structure
how
that
people
has a
think about
limit.
the idea, almost like the way people will imagine, like, was there a universe before our universe? Does the universe like go into a big crunch at the end of the cosmos and so on? Like,
Exactly, yeah.
people are able to imagine these things that, um, obviously, we're never going to be able to like experiment with
No,
or
no.
explore. But yeah,
The iron cage. It's actually like the language is actually of a casing, not a cage with like holes. It's like a shell casing. The iron casing is not that the world is so depressing. The iron casing is we are enclosed completely within a rigid structure that we already know is there. So it sort of blocks out everything outside of it like a metal sheet covering the sky. That's what Weber is talking about. His concern
is it a bit
primarily. Go on, please.
like a law deterministic based sort of view of the world? Is that what that is getting at?
Partially, but it's mainly just the viewpoint that even conceives of the idea that we can imagine something like laws governing the world at an ontic level, that's actually a really weird sentiment when you think about it for 5 seconds. Laws as we understand them are basically demarcations that we place upon the world itself.
Right.
There's like a manifold of stuff, and we distinguish between different parts and litigate between each other. Okay, what goes where, or what should go
I mean,
where? What do we
laws are
prefer?
really just describing functions of like physics or something
They
like
aren't just
that.
describing functions; they're also describing the relevant elements that functions concern. So, what's strange is that the world as such doesn't really come delineated in that way to us. There's consistency to it. Like it seems to, for example, in Delusian language, and I'm going to butcher, but I like this lingo. It seems to like record our impressions on it. So when we draw a line in the sand that has some longevity, we build a big wall dividing two parts of a community that actually does divide that community in two. Things like that. But
If I could just read a line real quick from one of the things that I read from Pierce.
purse. I
Let's
know
see.
it's
He
annoying.
says,
It's spelled like Pierce, but it's purse. Go on.
uh, okay, let's see. So, if now I, in my turn, inquire of the necessitarian why he prefers to suppose that all specification goes back to the beginning of things, he will answer me with one of those last few arguments which I left unanswered. I'm not going to go into those arguments, but he says, first he may say that chance is a thing absolutely unintelligible, therefore that we never can be entitled to make such a supposition, but that does not mean, does not this objection smack of naive impudence? It is not mine, it is his own conception of the universe, which leads abruptly to hard, ultimate, inexplicable, immutable law on the one hand, and to inexplicable specification and diversification of circumstances on the other. My view, on the contrary, hypothesizes nothing at all unless it be hypothesis to say that all specification came about in some sense, and it is not to be accepted as unaccountable. Undertake to account for anything by saying baldly that it is due to chance would indeed be futile. But this I do not do. I make use of chance chiefly to make room for a principle of generalization or tendency to form habits which I hold has produced all regularities. The mechanical philosopher leaves the whole specification of the world utterly unaccounted for, which is pretty nearly as bad as to baldly attribute it to chance. I attribute it altogether.
Here, come closer to your
chance
microphone. You're drifting out a little bit.
I'm so sorry. I attribute it altogether to chance, it is true, but to chance in the form of a spontaneity which is to some degree regular. It seems to me clear at any rate that one of these two positions must be taken, or else specification must be supposed due to a spontaneity which develops itself in a certain and not in a chance way by an objective logic like that of Hegel. This last way I leave as an open possibility for the present, for it is much opposed to the necessarian scheme of existence as my own theory is. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to read from that.
Okay, so this is where the time turner would come in handy. Um, yeah, basically. Um, but it's a very weird notion that we would think that at like an ontic level, sort of beyond human experience, the world is partitioned in that way, in just a way that bears some kind of legibility to organisms that are produced, apparently, from these operations. It's weird that we would even think that we can get behind them. This is Kant's whole point. It's like, well, we really can't. We really shouldn't be thinking of the world in that way. The laws we determine about, things we experience, well, they're a component. They're downstream from our experience, ultimately, from some apparatus beyond our capacity to understand that gives rise to our experience.
Seems like they're also mostly rooted in like their practical application, and that's also where we derive our sense of certainty from.
Sure,
our sense of
I think
confidence in the fact that these laws exist at all. Which I'm not saying that they do. I'm just saying like that's where our confidence comes from.
Well, I mean, whatever we're referring to when we call them laws, like they seem to exist, or something seems to exist, or at the very least, there is some kind of there, or there seems to be. But to bring this back to Harry Potter, the point is, it doesn't appear as though, despite the fact that there are sort of vague references to things discovered in the past, they aren't taught theory. They aren't taught like actual. They aren't taught productive skills. They are taught. They're effectively taught trade secrets, and that's it.
Yes, exactly.
It's
that's
all been
exactly how I put it.
It's all been done. Now, what's really peculiar though is that at no point in their entire education. Like, for example, Harry Potter is a rambunctious troublemaker all the way to his final year. Why? Why is this even possible? You are, again, every single one of your students, it's like it's gun school. At least a solid half of it is gun school. The fact that that isn't attended by some kind of rigid discipline is actually really fascinating, as much
Well, I
as it is
guess
horrific.
I'm wondering is why do you think she wrote Harry Potter that way? Because I have ideas about that. I think she's just playing into certain tropes about what students are portrayed as in schools, and like young students particularly. Like she's just playing into the idea that they emphasize recreation over wanting to do any serious hard work. And
I think Sean actually hit the nail on the head. I think she is very much inducted into a neoliberal way of conceiving of the relationship between society and the individual, where any kind of categorical move or any kind of and anything that is not the result of a direct personal interest in something else um, is inherently corrupt and inherently the product of vice and inherently leads to disaster. And so Hermione, despite their whole like the thing they're always parroting is like pity those who do not know love or whatever. Hermione feels an immense swell of pity for the house elves. She's a joke. Why? Because it's not towards any specific house elf. It's toward house elves. It's illegitimate. Um, anything of that, like, in fact, that's sort of categorically where the line is drawn between the villains and the bad guys. It's like, well, the good guys are entirely particular, the bad guys are entirely general, and there's a point
elaborate
there.
on that particular thing. Could you give examples of like the ways in which the good characters are particular and the ways in which the bad characters are general?
The bad characters make prejudgments about other people based upon trivial aspects of their biography or of their personal profile, like ethnicity, things like that, um, or species even.
Oh, I see.
The good guys by contrast have personal relationships with other people, and whenever characters make sort of systematic interventions or attempt to make interventions at the level of categories, they are villains. Um, when you look at the way in which the ministry is portrayed as being bad, it's always because they will make some kind of sweeping move categorically, and people will fall through the cracks or be picked up, or outliers will be picked up inappropriately. And that's a bad thing that actually does happen. But what's interesting is that there are no cases where um, things like general rules or general norms sustained as a result of um, establishing some kind of normal situation at a social level. There is no situation where that is characterized as a good thing. A good thing is always when some character specifically acts out from something specifically internal and specific to them, and a bad thing is when it's something more general and outside of them. Um, the best foil I can think of actually for Voldemort in fiction is Ellsworth Toohey from Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. Um, Ellsworth Toohey is a basically an I don't know if he's a newspaper magnate. He's some kind of like high ranking journalist though or something like that. And his whole thing is um, he tears people with individual talent and power and greatness, etc., down um, by making disparaging statements about their social effects in like journals or whatnot. Um, Voldemort kind of operates in a similar line, not in terms of like what he does. Obviously, Ellsworth Toohey at no point goes into like a a laser duel with oh, what's his name? Give me a moment. I gotta find this.
Cedric?
No.
No,
I'm
Harry.
still talking Ayn Rand. Give me one quick second here.
I thought you said laser duel is in like Voldemort with his wand.
No, I'm there's a side character in the Fountainhead, Wynand. That's it. But his role essentially, like in moral terms, is basically the same. He's sort of a categorical thinker who wants to constrain people by reference again to like categories, to the social, etc. He's just the dark side of the ministry, where he takes the inherent sort of categorical injustice of the ministry against non-human species and turns it against humans. But that's basically it. And even that in itself is kind of interesting. Like the distinction between, like, think about Star Trek, for example. There's that line in The Wrath of Khan. It's like, nobody, like, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's like when Kirk is giving the eulogy for Spock. He's says something to the effect of like, of all the aliens or whatever we've encountered, none has been more human, or something like that. Or Data. Um, there is a notion of the human that sort of transcends the trivial components that comprise any individual case. Um, Sean actually touched on this in his video too, which I liked. The and not in so many words, but he pointed out that, well, it's actually kind of, it's a little disturbing that Rowling is really wedded to the idea that specific racial identifiers necessarily, or at least as an overwhelming rule with rare exceptions, they just don't matter. Um, they are attended by like specific attitudes, specific behaviors, etc., etc. There it is. Thank you. Of all the souls I've encountered, his was the most human. Yeah, exactly. Insomnia Noir. Thank you for that. There isn't that in Harry Potter. Despite the fact that they are functionally human in all meaningful ways, house elves, centaurs, etc. At no point is any actual kind of community even treated as possible with them. They exist in their own little pocket bubbles that are always subordinate and always peripheral, and always sort of associated with either poverty and rags or with wilderness. Like there's no actual civilization of non-human beings in the Harry Potter universe. There's sort of vague gestures towards
I'm
goblins and
not
whatnot, but
sure
they
if
all,
that's
no, I'm actually pretty sure that's true, because the centaurs are basically only come out of the mist occasionally in the woods, um, unclothed with no technology except bows
okay.
and
That's fair.
arrows.
Yeah.
The goblins seem to be on some level, and the house elves seem to be on some level, except only insofar as they are integrated as functionaries of the wizarding world. Um, Mermaids, same deal as the centaurs. They're just kind of like weird ghosts that appear if you go into non-human elements where nothing is no structures stand. Um,
I'm curious. Yes, you can go on if you want. But I just was wondering why you think she wrote house elves into the story.
I think she wrote house elves into the story because um, she wanted the Malfoys to be really bad, and it was a plot device in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets that gave Harry a link into, like, it provided a hook for the plot. Um, it's like the it's the, I don't know, it's the man in the dark cloak taking off from the murder scene at the beginning of the story on a dark and stormy night. That's what the role of the house elves was. Later on, they were basically a cameo, and she had to account for, okay, well, we're expanding this world. Let's just take what we've already established and let's just make it bigger. There's just more of it now. There's just more Dobbies now. Because Dobby is not actually characterized by a desire for freedom. Dobby is characterized as a victim of abuse in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
Yeah.
And that's the distinction. It's not that he's not freed by Harry because Harry has some deep love of personal liberty that never manifests at any point in the story or in any of the stories. He is freed by Harry because he did Harry a solid, and he was abused by the Malfoys. That's literally it. If Dobby was treated well, the fact that he was a slave and had no autonomy would be treated as trivial. And it is indeed for every other house elf that he encounters in the story, as Sean points out, which I really like I really like that about that
Is Hermione
essay.
still not opposed even that treatment of house elves though, even when they're well treated?
She does, but the point is, she is ridiculed by the story for it. Because in addition to failing to actually get any sort of ball rolling, the story characterizes the situation at the end as being all is well, despite the fact that, again, like, you have massive populations in slavery. Um, all is well because the bad man died. And when she is attempting to sort of engage in activism, that in itself is ridiculed. The name, the slogan she comes up with is treated as a joke because it's funny. I think it's like spew. Um,
Yeah.
she has nobody else takes an interest. She's treated as ineffectual and foolish and clownish and preachy.
So I'm curious, why do you think she wrote Hermione to be not Hermione to be like that, but rather why do you think she made it ineffectual?
Contempt for woke scold left wing activists, or at least what we call them now. I think that's basically what
Really?
it was.
I mean,
Oh yeah.
at the time, it seemed like Rowling identified as such an activist.
How so?
I mean, she used to be like very big on like. I think she probably will still argue some of these things. I mean, she was. I believe she argued about like past relations. She was. I think she very much opposed like equality in general, whether it be economic or cultural or not.
But hang on, did she oppose that by suggesting that we should redistribute things while keeping the exact same form that actually locks people into a very substantive inequality indefinitely? Or did she
I don't
actually?
think she went that far. No.
No. So in
I
effect,
think.
so hang on. So in effect, what her activism amounted to was precisely what Harry does in the Chamber of Secrets, not anything like what Hermione does in the Goblet of Fire. She's not actually opposed to people being kept in a situation of absolute uh, intellectual and political and personal um, limitation vis-a-vis their peers. She just wants to make sure they're not abused or starved. So again, the echo here is with Harry and the Dursleys. Why did Harry need to escape the Dursleys? Because he was abused and kept in a broom cupboard. Why did Dobby need to escape the Malfoys? Because he was being abused and beaten. But actually, at no point does freedom as such factor into the equation. Harry doesn't need to leave the Dursleys because he's being saddled into a dead-end job at a poor school and can't learn anything because he's no interest in learning. All he cares about is gun magic. Um, the escape,
Oh, I
the
don't know if it's gun magic. It's just sort of like power and recreation in general.
gun magic. His no, seriously, his entire goal is, like, throughout the entire story, the only thing he demonstrates a consistent interest in is a airborne sport mimicking warfare and dueling, and that's literally it.
Well, there's also his relationship with that griffin and like animals in general throughout the series. I think.
Yeah, but what's the Griffin's role in the story? It's just a
Yeah, does
mount.
the griffin?
It's a
Yeah,
mount.
that's true.
It's a
But is
mount
it
for
used in
warfare.
combat?
Yes, it fights at one
I,
point.
but that's like at the end of the. Isn't that like it's book seven? I mean,
What
for
is?
most of the story, it seems like it's just used as like an animal companion that's used to like rescue Harry from, or I believe it's
Yeah, it's
used
a
at the
mount.
end of book three. So
It's a mount.
it's a mount, yeah. But I mean, I don't know if
Look, you're saying like
that's fair.
you're saying like was
It's not
Alex?
like Harry
No,
demonstrates
no,
an
you're saying
interest
like,
beyond
well,
the fact
hang
that
on.
it's a mount. So.
Oh, no, no, no. You're basically retorting that. Well, Alexander the Great wasn't just concerned with warfare; he also rode horses. It's like, but why?
Okay, that's actually a really good comparison. That's fair.
So, um, he has Harry Potter has two kinds of relationships with animals. Okay, he brutally murders them, or he rides them to brutally murder other animals.
Yeah.
that's that's what he does. Um, yeah, exactly. Rowling has that's very well put, Grammar Kami. Rowling has an issue with beating pets rather than keeping them. Rowling has no problem with people being pets. Case in point, Harry Potter. He is introduced into a world in which the mysteries of the cosmos are his to explore. Like, think about this. Nobody is using magic to explore space. Nobody's talking about like let's like discover things. It's always no. Let's contain the stuff we already control, Fantastic Beasts is where to find them. That, or like whatever the different departments of the Ministry do. There's no actual scientists here, or let's train to kill the people with the weird twirly mustaches and the absence of noses. That's that's it. There's no curiosity about the world. Why? Well, because it's entirely disenchanted. Everything there is to know about the world is right here. It's just different lines of a system that's perfectly closed. There's vague gestures again to things that a more creative author might do. But just 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
Sure. Just want to make sure people don't dox themselves. Like there's no attention paid to like what you could do in terms of like think about this for a second. Obviously for the first couple of books, the Wizarding world is kept separate from the Muggle world as sort of like it's a gimmick, right? It's like, well, why don't we see
on the very first part?
It's a fairy tale, right? It's like, well, why don't we see hobbits anymore? Well, because the hobbits are very shy and they hide in their hill, etc., etc. However, we're actually talking about a super complex bureaucracy modeled after ones that are the direct result of British politics. One moment. Yeah, so it's why don't they already rule everything? Like among other things, like people talk about like it was that whole stupid thing in the Crimes of Grindelwald. It's like, oh no, World War II is coming or whatever. But like there's no interest in the climate. There are no classes, for example, on ecology, despite the fact that they're training people to be able to radically alter the environment.
I wonder if Rowling even like considered climate change an issue when she was writing any of this, or if she even knew about it.
No, she did. Everything that Rowling does, well, she did in a way. How Rowling writes her world is that any imposition of the social on the individual is a sign of viciousness and an injustice inherently.
Yeah.
And the only crime that an individual can really commit, actually, is against their own conscience. Or if they don't have a conscience. But that's literally it. There are kind people, and there are mobs, and that's everything. So the political virtue. This is why, for example, like the houses actually bear only 2 of the houses have anything to do whatsoever with skill sets. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. Those are the only 2 houses that actually belong in a school. Gryffindor and Slytherin are House King Arthur and House Adolf. That's literally all they are.
Just to sort of, I guess, steel man the houses in that respect. I guess you could say Slytherin's skill set is more like manipulation and like I don't know, like competition or something like that. Like being good at a competition. And then in the case of Gryffindor,
that's literally all the Gryffindors do. However, they are mirror images of each other. Harry, Ron, and Hermione brutalize and manipulate their way through every single story. That's literally how they get through every obstacle. They lie, they cheat, they steal, or they kill. That's it. The Slytherins do it.
They do some clever stuff.
The only thing the Slytherins do that's different is they get brutalized occasionally by the Gryffindors, and it's written in such a way that you laugh at it. That's literally it.
Okay, I see. So the mistake I made earlier is I was just thinking about how she describes the houses rather than how she actually portrays them. You're talking about how she portrays them in actuality.
Well, how she describes them too.
In the case of like description, it seems like you could say that Gryffindor involves a skill set which is like courage and being those.
The Slytherins are extremely ballsy. They just don't like other people.
Again, you're talking about function, not description. So I'm just comparing, like, in terms of the description of the houses, right?
Well, what if we're just? I mean, I could just use random sounds in place of them. Then, if the function doesn't matter, the description is indicating a function, right?
Oh, sorry. Okay, so what I mean is that you're talking about how the Slytherins actually behave in the story, whereas they're not described as being ballsy.
They are, though. That's actually the final line from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Quintessential Slytherin professor, bravest man I ever knew.
That's weird because that's like literally meant to be the trait of Gryffindor. Okay, I see. That's dumb.
The Slytherins are actually extremely brave. There's even talk about that. I think if memory serves, I can't remember which book it was, but there's a portrait representing a Slytherin member, and he even talks about like, no, you're actually being unfair. Slytherins are very courageous in their own way, which they are. In fact, they're kind of more ballsy because the Gryffindors live in Christmas land constantly, and they have nothing bad happen to them. The Slytherins, by contrast, are like running a fucking mob. So it's the
Yeah.
which, by the way, so are the Gryffindors. Just theirs has the legitimacy of a state, completely unearned, by the way, because it's still unclear exactly why there's a bureaucracy and over what it's a bureaucracy to begin with. It's very strange. Like the Ministry for Magic has no electoral process. It is full of specialized specialized bureaucrats who are trained, God knows where, um, to do absolutely nothing but just contain stuff as
Okay,
violently as
actually,
possible.
I
Go on.
think I might remember a reason why it exists. One reason she gave, which was that I think it was a matter of separating wizards from Muggles earlier in history because there was like an issue with magical people getting persecuted by regular people somehow,
Which is
like they were
silly.
getting burned as witches.
Well, which is silly
Um,
because what actually would have happened is they would have been worshipped as gods.
well, I
Because
agree. I mean,
yeah,
it doesn't make any sense. I'm just saying that that's the reason she gave.
yeah, but I don't care about that. Like at a certain point, like
Yeah,
Rowling sort of bullshit stuff in her stories, right? Like the explanations she
absolutely.
gives are bad. That's one of the reasons
Yeah,
why we
absolutely.
don't.
That's
That's why
definitely
we
the case for
don't.
most
That's
of
why we
her.
don't fall back on her explanations. We look at, well,
Yeah,
what does the stuff she put in there actually imply? Because that's the
yeah.
interesting thing. So I guess I need to wrap this up because I need to make dinner. So the final point I wanted to
That's
get
totally
at
fine.
again is like political virtues. What are the political virtues? Well, curiously enough, what makes somebody, and by political virtues I mean like what are the things one has to embody in order to, I guess like in ancient Persian it'd be like have the far or something, but have the mandate of heaven or have the right to um, have an influence on the course of history at an institutional level. And what's really interesting is that having any knack for cooperation or administration, or doing any sort of menial work that actually constitutes like the day-to-day running of a society or the administering of a society or government, those not only do they bear, they have no value as far as Rowling is concerned. Um, they are actually signs of vice because there is no such thing as a successful administrator um, who isn't a violent busybody at heart. And this even extends to Hermione, because insofar as she attempts to make any kind of intervention at that level, she is ridiculed almost to the point of being vilified. Um, so ultimately, like political virtue, like the greatest virtues in the Harry Potter universe socially, like who's the actual boss of the Wizarding world? Who's the boss? Who's in charge?
I guess it'd be like the person at the head of the ministry or Dumbledore or something
It's
like that.
Dumbledore. It's Dumbledore 100%. Nobody gives a shit about the minister. Like they really don't. The minister is a, like I mean there's even something Weberian about this in that every single person who enters into the ministry, with the exception of failures like Mr. Weasley, who basically don't go up and remain poor, God knows why. Again, you have like magical access to limitless resources. What the hell are you doing? Um, like the very fact of a class disparity in the Wizarding world that's not directly tied to magical power is absurd by itself. Um, but every single person who enters in either was corrupt to begin with or loses their soul, and only regains their soul when either the ministry dies and they are kicked out, as in the case of Percy Weasley, or when they are sacked. Um, the only actual virtues in Harry Potter are having the equivalent powers of the state at your disposal as a lawless individual. Dumbledore, again, is respected not because he does anything, because what he does ultimately is play the exact same game as the bureaucrats, but he does so autonomously.
Yeah.
He does so unilaterally without anybody else's input. He just manipulates things, but he does manipulate things, and he's cool for it. But Scrimgeour does the exact
Well, I
same
think
thing.
a
Scrimgeour does
part
the
of the
exact same thing, and
reason,
he's vilified for
right?
it.
gonna say, I think a part of the reason why he's considered cool, though, in this world, and also in the story, is just because of his cause. Rather, and the Ministry's cause is like considered wrong, but Dumbledore's cause is
The
considered
Ministry's cause
correct
at the
because.
time of at the time of Scrimgeour, the Ministry's cause is to fight Voldemort.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's
Dumbledore
true.
is not Dumbledore didn't join Spew either. See, that would have been interesting.
Yeah.
That would have been
Wait, are
interesting.
you sure he didn't?
I'm pretty sure he didn't. If he did, that'd be
Okay.
great. That'd make me curious. If you want to look that up quickly, that'd be cool to know. But like no, it's like it's basically Star Wars logic. Like the Jedi's are the good guys not because they obey the law, not because they're peacekeepers, but because um well, I mean they aren't even really good guys then. That's kind of a bad as I think about it more, it's kind of a bad example, but I think of like literally like the Jedi's role in Star Wars is to do the bidding of the Chancellor until they disagree with him or have some religious difference with him, at which point they just march with laser swords into his office and try to kill him outright. Um, for some reason, they think they can arrest the Sith Lord, which is confusing. Yeah, exactly, Zoshalix. So, like, it's painted as like this like criminal thing that Scrimgeour is doing, or this morally sketchy thing where he's like, you're trying to get the Chosen One on side with the Ministry as a propaganda tool, but it's like this is literally all Dumbledore has done for the entire series. Is he's pulled strings behind the scenes and he's manipulated people's perceptions of things to get the ends that he wants.
I mean, one of the things about the Ministry that sort of makes a difference, though, is that they initially denied that Voldemort was back.
Yeah, but that's because anything social is inherently corrupt. Like they didn't deny that he was back because they believed that. They denied that he was back because it was inconvenient.
Okay.
It was inconvenient for Fudge because now he had to deal with a problem. It was inconvenient for, like, it was. Yeah, I mean, like Dumbledore is even sort of treated as like an Alex Jones character during that point because it's he's described as like going off and trying to convince people that Voldemort exists, and he's sort of ridiculed for it. And he loses social capital as a result. Um, yeah, but again, it's just that same thing. Like society is an inherently corrupt notion. There are individuals, and only things that individuals do matter, and it's not constituted by society at all. Which is why, again, you have poor and rich, all these sorts of things, and it's actually downstream from the fact of society for Rowling, or the fact of any kind of collective governance or action, and not downstream or not the result of.
Collective action.
Well, it's tricky because like even we would be forced to say like inequalities of that sort are the result of corrupt actions by powers in that way that sort of doled out things that didn't belong to them, if to anybody, unequally based upon very unvirtuous criteria. Um, but at the same time, I think Sean just hit the nail on the head with that one. Wealth is determined entirely by your virtue as a character. She has no interest whatsoever in actual education. So there's literally nothing else. People don't develop an interest in particular topics based on their upbringing. Um, people don't succeed or fail based upon the conditions of their birth or whatever. That all just sort of sorts itself out, or it's played for laughs in the case of Ron. But like there are no consequences for that though, right? Like Ron doesn't fail. Ron just is a gag for a little bit because his wand breaks and he can't afford a new one. It's a joke. Um, Harry's parents are wealthy. Why? Well, I guess they were just really cool people or something. That's never actually explained. It's like there's no ecology to this world. Like there are no relations between things at a systemic level. It's
This is
literally
also
just everything is just a manifestation of your own soul, I guess.
It's also especially bizarre to me just because, like, as far as I understand J.K. Rowling's background in life, like, this might be inaccurate, like, maybe it was just, like, a lie, but I had heard that she was writing the first book of Harry Potter, at least, when she was very, very poor, a single mother, and she'd, like, write it on the train
Oh,
or
I know what
something,
you mean.
and
Like
she, like,
you
came
think
from
her
a poor
tune
background.
changed. You think her tune changed because she got rich and she suddenly didn't like the idea of sharing cash.
I'm wondering if that's the case. Or at least I'm
I don't
puzzled
think so.
why she is writing it this way.
No, I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Because I think that attitude is actually very much a lower class attitude. Um, I have a sense of this because
I guess that's
that's
sort of
sort
what
of
I'm saying, is like,
well, that's sort of where I
maybe
come
that's where it came
that
from.
that's sort of where I came from, right? Um, like that's a very common attitude there, and that's again sort of borne out by the total disinterest in like things that are typically associated with, like liberal education.
Right.
Don't take philosophy or history or feminist dance theory. Take the trades, right? Get a
Yeah.
job. That kind of thing. Like zero interest in history or whatever, despite the fact that again, all of the interest even in Harry Potter as a franchise is in the history. Without that, there'd be
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah. Doesn't Neville the perpetual fuck up somehow redeem himself at some point? Yeah, he off screen grows super buff and just becomes as efficient in violence as Harry Potter. His grand contribution is he cuts the head off the snake because now he's a he's a he's a noble warrior too, ready to become a cop, which I think he does. It's 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 yeah. Like it's that's literally what it all comes down to is every aspect of every single character's situation um is as trivial and there are no relations between things. Harry's wealth, uh the Weasleys' poverty, the house elves' enslavement, are on a par with the greasiness of Snape's hair. Like it has no connection with any underlying thing. It is just
Yeah.
a gloss that is put over them because they are just a type. Like Cho Chang. Cho Chang is just a Chinese character. That's why she's called Cho Chang.
It's funny that J.K. Rowling is essentially committing the like thing that she's ascribing to the villains in the story, in portraying the story in this way.
Yeah, it is. It
Yeah,
really
because you're talking
is.
about how they are based on like generalization and stereotyping. That's exactly what she's doing. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's one of the reasons why a sort of neoliberal approach is inherently dishonorable because it's not circumspect. See, like I have respect for people who actually have liberal values and extol them as liberal values, understanding where they're coming from. Like, that's basically what pragmatists are doing. They understand that like these values come from a specific ethical sphere. They only make sense in specific historical contexts. Yada yada yada. But um, like what Rowling is doing by contrast. See, like a pragmatist engages in, or a liberal engages in a politics of exclusion, right? There is like think of a difference between a bell curve and a Pareto curve. So a bell curve is like this, center like this, just around my head, right? It's a bell, and it represents ultimately exclusion. Like there's a range of things in the curve, but they're fixed limits. A Pareto curve, by contrast, is like it's like that, and what you get is one has like terminuses, yeah, it ends. One is just a trajectory. There's a peak where people matter, and then there's an attitude of total indifference, just a sliding scale off into infinity. Um, a liberal understands the world as being, or their world, in which liberalism makes sense, being sort of a closed, kind of a closed sphere, sort of like Weber's Disenchanted World. It's a closed sphere where specific rules are set up and which can then be abided by. and its preference for that system that gives it legitimacy. The neoliberal one, by contrast, basically takes that same it takes the positive outcomes of that closed system, and it treats it as if this is simply, well, it's like Aristotle's eudaimonia. Um, this is just as good as it gets, and it is kind of fed into by humanity. And all these notions of like consent of the governed and tacit consent and free movement, yada yada yada, all that doesn't matter. They may be abided by, like they may argue that, well, no, like free movement is good, but it's always on the basis of maximizing the peak, not in terms of facilitating an actual like ethical sphere, which liberalism does. Like liberalism is an ethical attitude to politics. Neoliberalism is an attitude to politics that refers everything to indifferent processes, and you just don't care what happens to people who don't ultimately benefit from those processes, because, well, that's just how it works. There are these systems that can be sort of optimized, but everything at the end of the day is not the result of choice. It's the result of these processes sorting out people on the basis of their choices. So the system itself is no longer subject to sort of creative interventions, except when you're trying to optimize things. You're trying to make like the curve, like you're trying to make sure that like nothing falls through the cracks, that the system as already imagined is just sort of perfected in its ability to manifest the appropriate outcomes in the world.
There's no hint at like reforming.
No, you can't. Reforming is silly, because we already know what the best outcome is. It's the outcome that we have with all the baddies out of the positions and out of the high offices. Yeah. Anyways, I gotta go. I have to make food. Thanks for coming on, Leo. It was fun. You're welcome back anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.